The NHL trade deadline has come and gone, and so has Victor Mete. We break down another busy week for the Montreal Canadiens and more on this week's edition of Hockey Inside Out. Julian McKenzie back at it for yet another edition of Hockey Inside Out. Of course, we have the usual suspects with us. Stu Cowan of the Montreal Gazette, Jessica Rusnak of CBC Daybreak Montreal, former Montreal Canadiens defenseman and former assistant coach Rick Green. Let's get right to it, everybody. Let's talk about the Montreal Canadiens and how they look like, I don't want to say world beaters, but they did on Monday against the Toronto Maple Leafs, but that comes after a losing streak and a 5-0 loss to the Winnipeg Jets. I don't know if they're good anymore. I don't know if they're bad anymore. I can't tell what to make of this damn team. It doesn't make sense. When you look at a team that is able to defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs, who we all think are going to win this division at this point, but could also lose a game like how they did over the weekend to the Winnipeg Jets, what do you make of this team, even with the acquisitions they made on Monday, which we'll get to?
I think this has been the story of the team all year long. If you go back to their hot start and it seemed like this was going to be a team that was going to be at the top of the standings the whole time, then they went through the slump. They had several coaching changes, and then they had the COVID episode. They came back from that. They seemed really well rested, and it was like, okay, maybe it was just the rest and this will help them. And then they've had, some stinkers of a game, but their ability to bounce back after that 5-0 loss to Winnipeg was huge. They were all embarrassed by that performance. Josh Anderson even said that they owed the kind of game that they had against the Toronto Maple Leafs to Jake Allen after leaving him out there. And it's a huge measuring stick kind of game that they like to talk about. And it was very important for them to have that bounce back. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a huge momentum changer, because who really knows with this team? They have such highs and they have such lows. It's finding consistency has been their biggest problem this year.
And, you can say what you want about statistics, but, every time they score first, obviously they look like a different hockey team. And that was a great indication against Toronto. But I think the bottom line is the matchup and the message that the Canadiens are trying to send to Toronto in the event that they're going to play them, in the first round, if it gets to that. And that's, trying to give a psychological edge. And there's a big part of that in the game when you put some doubt in the opposition's team that is, expected to win. And the Canadiens, I think, really sent a message in the way they played, and obviously the outcome say, hey, listen, Toronto, it's going to be tough. If we do end up playing you, you're going to have your hands full, and watch out, because if we bring our A game, which they're obviously planning on doing, it's going to make it really, really difficult for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
The thing is, Canadiens fans are so focused on the Habs. I mean, the whole league is like this year. The Leafs look like they were by far the best team in the division. Then they go 1-6 over a 7-game stretch. Then they go 9-0-1 in their next 10, and then they lose to the Habs. This is a crazy season, and this schedule is wearing guys down. And it's the same with every team. I think teams get worn down. They go in a little slump, and then they get an adrenaline rush after a win, and they win a few games in a row. But this is a really, really tough, grinding schedule. And if you look around the league, every team in the league has had ups and downs. It's been a real roller coaster ride this season. The key is going to be which team can get hot going into the playoffs. It looks right now, especially heading into 2 games against the Calgary Flames, if Canadiens could win both of those, basically the Flames are out and the Habs are definitely in the playoffs. That would be a huge thing, because that would give them a chance to rest some guys going down the stretch and have everybody ready to go in the playoffs. But this is a crazy season, and it's not just for the Canadiens, it's for every team. It's really hard with the schedule these guys are playing to be consistent.
And, you have to look at the injuries. Again, we touched on it before. You've got to, hope that some guys come back for the Canadiens, and, everybody else stays healthy. So you've got to stay healthy and fresh going into the playoffs. And, hopefully that, it'll bounce the right way for the Habs, and they can feel good going in and finishing up the final stretch, and then carrying it on into the playoffs.
And the Canadiens have depth now like they haven't had I can't even remember the last time they had this much depth. So they're set up that they can survive injuries, and the way their injuries are now, it looks like everybody should be healthy by the time the playoffs start. We're still not certain about Brendan Gallagher with that thumb. But if everybody's healthy to go in the playoffs, this is a team I wouldn't want to face in the first round.
Jess, did you want to add anything before I moved on to the talk about the trade deadline?
Well, I think that this week is just a perfect opportunity for the Canadiens to show what they got. You know, you can say all season long it's almost been playoff style, but the games against Calgary, there's so much importance against that. And if the Canadiens don't show up for those games, well, that's a huge problem. And there's a lot of questions that are going to be asked at the end of the year if they can't get it done and get into the playoffs. And if you look back at these games, that's where they would end up ultimately losing it.
And you know, with 17 games left and looking at the teams that they're up against, this is a real test of the character of that dressing room. And if you can find a way as a group and individually to be the best you can be, boy oh boy, you're not in the right profession. And I mean, these type of scenarios, I remember, you know, over the years, you get yourself in a do or die situation, and you really look around and see in your room which guys are going to pick it up, who's going to step it up, who's going to make the difference. And this will give you a real true reading on, okay, what kind of guys do we have here and how badly do they want it? There's no secret here. It's desperation, and let's see who's going to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, if they play 500 the rest of the way, the Flames aren't going to catch them. The Flames would have to go like something like 11-1 or their last 12 games. But beating the Flames back-to-back would put a dagger in them, and it's over. And as I mentioned earlier, we give the Canes a chance to rest up some players going into the playoffs.
And I think it's really important, you know, in the final stretch. And I remember in '86 we struggled, you know, in the last month of the season until we finally got our act going. And you want to get yourself in a situation where you're playing very well and you're hitting on all cylinders. And I think it's going to be really obviously critical that the guys find real consistency and have everybody playing at their very best, so that will carry on right into the big playoff stretch.
And you can't say Marc Bergevin at least didn't try to add reinforcements ahead of that playoff run. As we move on to question 2, where we discuss some of the moves made by the Montreal Canadiens. John Merrill acquired from the Detroit Red Wings to help bolster up the defensive side. Eric Gustafsson acquired from Philadelphia for a 7th-round pick. This is a defenseman, I did not know this, had a 60-point season a few years ago. And of course, even though it wasn't necessarily a trade, the Canadiens put Victor Mete on waivers. So a lot of movement going around on the defensive side. What did you all think of Marc Bergevin's moves over the last few days? We know Eric Staal was acquired a few days ago. He's obviously gone through his quarantine. He's playing with the team now. But with the moves they made on Monday and Sunday, on the defensive side, what did you feel? How did you feel about the moves Marc Bergevin made?
I thought he made good moves. I mean, people will say, oh, I didn't do enough at the trade deadline. Marc Bergevin builds his teams during the offseason. Look at the moves he made in the offseason. The 5 players he brought in have all played really well. They brought in Romanov, a rookie. He's played really well. All the moves he made in the offseason have worked out fantastic. He tinkered at the trade deadline here. He added some depth. They need depth on defense. You know, we saw Victor Mete struggling with the physical side of the play. Obviously, the Canadiens had seen enough of him. They let him go on waivers. Ottawa picked him up. But, you know, Gustafsson, as you mentioned, Julian had a 60-point season. He's a power play guy, big shot, an offensive type defenseman. The exact opposite of Merrill, who's a defensive type of defenseman. So he's got 2 different types of defensemen that can put in and out of the lineup, and it creates competition on the blue line for jobs. And there's now competition at every position on the Canadiens, including goaltending. And the Canes haven't had that in recent years. So I think the moves he made were really good. I wrote a column this week. Marc Bergevin has done everything he possibly could to make this team competitive without giving up any assets in the future, which is quite remarkable and commendable that he's been able to do that. And now it's on the Canadiens, and as you mentioned earlier, Julian, it's on the leadership group. This leadership group with Shea Weber has to step up. This team has looked fragile in some games, including that 5-0 loss to the Jets. They can't be that way going down the stretch. Now it's they had a players-only meeting, which is a good thing. But Marc Bergevin, his work is done. Now, it's on the guys in the room. It's up to them. It would have been silly, I think, for Marc Bergevin to give up future assets and go all in right now. The Canadiens are a good team. When you look at Tampa and Toronto and that, I mean, it would be an upset for the Canadiens to beat those guys in the playoffs. I don't think it was the time to start giving away future prospects for the hope for a one-year chance, and that's what Marc Bergevin said. And that's admirable for him also, because he only has 1 year left on his contract. I mean, if he was worried about his own job, he could have just gone all in, got rid of the prospects and everything and try and make it this year, but he didn't do that. But the Canadiens are built to compete in the playoffs. They got a lot of depth, and as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't want to play them in the first round.
And if you think of it, it's such a unique year this year because of COVID. It's not the same schedule that we're used to in the regular season or the playoffs. So it's not really the time to make any big kind of move. So he went out there and addressed issues that they needed. They needed a veteran centerman. He went out there and acquired Stahl. And then afterwards, he went and got 2 depth defensemen that's going to help this team. And as Marc Bergevin has said many times in the past, you can't have too many defensemen. So it was a move that was not all that surprising for him. But so far, what he's done is perfect and is the situation that he needed to do. And Dominic Ducharme was even asked about the inner competition with this team, with some of the new acquisitions. And he said it's great. Teams need to have that inner competition so that people can elevate their games and bring out the best in all the players.
And, and with the addition of those 2 guys that have NHL experience, again, it's adding to, like everybody's touched on, their depth. And, Bergevin's hoping that Gustafsson is going to be able to find his way like he did in Chicago, where he got his 60 points to create something offensively. And, Merrill, the other guy, a big body, 6'3", good size, a very solid player. He's going to, again, complement their group. And, as they get down the stretch, they're going to need a little bit from each one of those guys in the event that one guy goes down. So, again, a move that's going to allow a little bit more stability in the event of some guys get hurt, or at least they have some proven NHL guys that are going to step in there and are going to be able to contribute in a positive way.
And as you mentioned there, Rick, the importance of experience. Marc Bergevin likes to say there's certain players that get you to the playoffs, and there's other players that get you through the playoffs. Eric Stahl is one of those guys who in the playoffs can play a huge role. We're big face-offs, just sort of being on the bench, having that veteran guy to sort of lean on, take some of the pressure off the young centermen that they faced last year during the playoff bubble. So as I mentioned earlier, they got a lot of experience, they got a lot of depth, they got a lot of competition for jobs at every position. So going into the playoffs, they're set up pretty well, I think. Are they a favorite to win the Stanley Cup? Of course not. But can they pull off an upset in the first round or the second round? I think so. And, you look in previous playoffs, every year there's a number 1 seed that gets beaten in the first round of the playoffs, it seems. The playoffs are a different, totally different game. And, some people criticize Marc Bergevin. He always says, get in the playoffs and anything can happen. But anything can happen in the playoffs. And the Canadiens are a team that are set up right now that I think could make anything happen.
And I think it's important to note that John Merrill brings in a new style, hairstyle. So your haircut, whatever he's got going. So, maybe that could be a trend in Montreal, and then you'll see every guy walking down the street with it.
Is it kind of already a trend?
I can't comment on the hair, but my buddy John Lou at TSN said that he looks like a character at a Letterkenny.
Yes. John Merrill definitely looks like someone who would fit on Letterkenny. Also, I feel if I saw John Merrill in like the Plateau or something, I'd be like, all right, he's just one of those guys there. I just wanted to ask this like a counterpoint here. Yes, the Canadiens did what they could on defense, but with the injury to Brendan Gallagher, and that's a whole other issue in itself, maybe, do you think the Canadiens could have used a move at the right wing position? There were some guys flying around. Mike Hoffman was in trade rumors. I was just curious if you thought maybe the Canadiens could have done something there.
Well, that's where Cole Caufield comes in, right? I mean, Cole Caufield is the other deadline acquisition. He's gonna be with this team before the end of the season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Marc Bergevin hasn't confirmed it, but I think 3 goals in his first 2 games with Laval, including 2 game winners. Is he ready for the NHL? We're not certain. Is he ready to get a shot in the NHL to see what he can do? Definitely.
And I think if you went after a bigger name like Hoffman, you would have to give up too much for it. And you're closing that door for Cole Caufield. And I think it's better to sort of roll the dice with him and see what he's able to bring rather than trying and go out and get something and maybe give up a prospect or a higher draft pick that would have turned out to help your team down the road.
And it's tough to make deals. I mean, we've seen it, all through the league. And obviously, there's nothing there that Bergevin thought that might make his team better for whatever combinations that could have been involved. And he said before he basically really likes his team, and obviously he likes his group up front. And the other part of the equation is nothing really was presented that made a lot of sense for him. So he's going to go with the status quo and hope that these guys are going to perform up to their capabilities.
No, I see a lot of the trade comments on Twitter and that, and I think Canadiens fans sometimes forget that there's a salary cap. Go out and get the Hall, go out and get this guy, go out and get that guy. Well, if you're bringing $5 million in, you got to send $5 million out. That's the new world of the NHL. It's easy to say we should have got this guy, or they should have got that guy, or they should have got this guy. But the salary cap rules the NHL now, and the Canadiens are right up against the cap. So, Marc Bergevin's hands are tied a bit, and even though trying to get Cole Caufield into the lineup is going to impact the salary cap also. So we have to leave some space there.
Yep, a flat salary cap world is what we live in, and we might be in that flat salary cap world for a bit of time after. I want to transition to the next question here. I probably could have made it a little easier if we had stayed on defensemen, but that's on me. I did switch it to another topic here. But it is good that the Canadiens were able to bolster that side of their team, because if you look at some notable faces on defense, Jeff Petry, Shea Weber come to mind. Their play has tailed off as of recently. But one guy who has not tailed off, and he's actually been pretty good for the most part of this year, is Joel Edmundson. He played 27 minutes against the Toronto Maple Leafs this year, and we've already raved about his plus-minus. What have you guys thought about Joel Edmondson's play this year? And I don't want to suggest that he could be a number one defenseman. I know the question is kind of written as such here, but when you look at the overall play of everybody to this point to now, how would you feel if it ended up near the end of the year, you look at everyone's play and you're like, wow, Joel Edmundson played like the team's best defenseman? Like, how would you guys feel about that?
Well, what can you say about, defensemen being the most important people on your hockey?
Here we go, Rick. Saw that coming from you, buddy.
Again, a classic example of a guy that just knows how to play the game, and plays within his capabilities. And you look the way he plays each and every game, you know what you're going to get from him. He's not a flashy guy, but he's always in the right place, and he's always positioned himself that the opposition has to go through him to get to the net. And if he's not blocking shots, he's getting away with a couple of whacks and hacks. So that part of the game is going to become critical moving forward down the stretch here. And I'm very happy for him because he's grabbed the opportunity and shown consistently each and every night what he can bring to that hockey club. He brings stability. He's a character, good guy, obviously, to have in the dressing room. And he sends a message to the opposition that each and every night, when I'm on the ice, there's nobody going to try and beat me or push me off the puck or win the one-on-one battle. So love to see it, and he's going to be a huge part of the hockey team moving forward.
I would say he's a secret star because he's not necessarily, if you're watching the game, that you can point out because of, a flashy goal or something like that. But he's doing exactly what you need him to do as a strong defenseman, to do the little things right that you don't necessarily pick up on. And I think it's important for another defenseman to sort of take the torch from a Jeff Petry or Shea Weber and log those kind of minutes and help those guys out. Joel Edmundson is 27 years old. Jeff Petry's 33. Shea Weber's 35. So they need a little bit more of a break, especially in a schedule like this. And I think it's huge that he's been able to play those kind of minutes, especially against that game against Toronto. And I think it will just help some of the older veteran players on the Montreal Canadiens blue line.
I've mentioned before on this show that Joel Edmundson reminds me of our good friend Rick Green.
Rick Green.
That steady, big defenseman, solid, hard to play against, physical against the boards, just a steadying influence out there. Plus minus is a stat that can be overrated, but when you're plus 29 and you're leading the NHL, that says something about it. It also says something about how Jeff Petry's game went down after he was wasn't Edmondson's partner anymore. He's like that. There's that reliable guy back there. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, moves the puck, knows his limitations. He's a faster skater. Sometimes, you'll see every once in a while, he doesn't pinch often, but when he does, watch how quickly he gets back. He can move pretty big, pretty fast for a big guy. He was a really, really good pickup by Marc Bergevin during the offseason. We talked about experience earlier. He was a guy who was a Stanley Cup ring with St. Louis. You listen to one of the bad things, many bad things about COVID is that as reporters are not allowed in the room, so you don't really get to know these guys, like what they're like. But just listening to Edmundson talk on Zooms, you can tell he's a really intelligent guy, the kind of guy I'm sure in the locker room when he speaks, the players listen. But again, he's like Rick Green. He's just that solid, steady guy back there, including the hack and whack that he gets away with every once in a while. But just a great pickup. And him playing 27 minutes against the Leafs The most important part about that is that it allowed Shea Weber to only play 21 minutes. And moving forward, if he can take some of that ice time away from Weber, that's going to be huge. That's really give Weber a little bit, instead of Weber playing 25 minutes every night. Those guys play hard minutes too. Those aren't easy 27 minutes. They're playing against the other team's top line. It's physical, it's tough. But Edmundson has just been really, really good this season.
And he can log some extra minutes because as a so-called defensive defenseman, like myself, he had no idea what the offensive zone looked like. So the actual rink became smaller, and you saved a lot of energy because it was only you only had to play 3/4 of the rink instead of like some of the guys that are in and out on the offense. But in all fairness to him, just love his intelligence and his ability to play within his capabilities each and every night, and just a great addition.
And Dominic Ducharme mentioned that the other night also, Rick, just about how he's smart. Edmondson's smart. He doesn't overexert himself when he doesn't have to. He knows how to pick his spots here and there. It's similar to the way Corey Perry plays as a forward. Veteran guys that know how to – they realize they don't have the energy they did when they were 23 years old, but they've learned how to use that energy or conserve that energy when they need to conserve it.
Well, with that, I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that Joel Edmundson is the team's most consistent defenseman.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And just look at how well the guys, as I say, Jeff Petry is a different defenseman when he's playing with Edmundson and when he's playing without Edmundson.
Moving on to the next question, the next topic, Cole Caufield. He's finally with the Montreal Canadiens organization. He's finally with the Laval Rocket. And what does he do? As Stu alluded to earlier, scores himself some goals. That first one he scored, by the way, with the Laval Rocket from the Ovechkin spot, chef's kiss. Really good. This kid's really good. This kid has looked really good. What are your takeaways of Cole Caufield? And are you circling April 19th, which is when the Laval Rocket begin this layoff of a couple days until the 30th? I know some people are looking at that and are like, hey, maybe Cole Caufield should get called up to the Canadiens then. I mean, I have my thoughts. I think they should hold off. But what do you all think?
Well, he's doing what he's done at every level, and you know what? He doesn't waste any time in taking a couple of games or a couple of periods to get adjusted. And you look at the way this kid handles himself. Nothing but great things. What he brings each and every shift that he's on there, and obviously the results are what he thrives on, and he really finds ways to produce. And wow, what a talent. And, those kind of guys don't come around that often. And obviously, when given the opportunity, he knows how to take advantage of it. And he'll definitely, I think, be part of the Montreal Canadiens really soon.
Well, that chef's kiss goal, as you described it, Julian, that was a bouncing puck, too. I mean, it wasn't a flat pass. The puck was bouncing, and he doesn't care. He just shoots. The kid's a shooter. Not only did he shoot, it was bar down. And then his second goal that night, his own rebound, not only the awareness to, you see so many guys do the turn around the net after they shoot and they don't follow up their own rebound. Not only did he follow up his own rebound, he got his own rebound and upstairs roofed it. I mean, that's goal scorers' goals, back to back. And to me, I think they have to call him up during that 11-day stretch. He went 10 days or whatever it was without playing after the University of Wisconsin season ended until he played in Laval. I don't think you want him sitting and not playing for 11 days in a row. It's a perfect opportunity to bring him up. Give him a couple of games with the Canadiens. If it works out, great. If he doesn't look like he's ready to play, you send him back. But you keep him playing. You get him a couple of games in there. I don't think you want him going 11 days without playing. And it's a perfect opportunity to give him a test. And if the Canadiens at that point, if they can beat the Flames both games this week, and they have, looks like their playoff spot is almost guaranteed. There's nothing to lose there. It's like a chance to give him a little taste of it. See what he can do. I think he'll fit in fine at the NHL level. Watching him against Laval, and I know it's the AHL. I know it's not the same as the NHL, the speed, but he's got quick feet and his ability just to find that open space. Just the way that that first goal, the way he slid into the Ovechkin spot and he got it. He's quick enough. The thing is, the big question, of course, is the strength thing and how he's going to handle it when the physical abuse that he's going to take in the NHL. We've seen Nick Suzuki, how that's impacted him. But the only way you're going to find out is to try him. Put him in there a couple of games. And as I said, during that 11-day break the Rocket have. And if he looks great. And if he looks like he needs some more seasoning in Laval, send him back to Laval.
It was really something out of a Hollywood movie, the way he made his debut, especially winning the Holby Baker, that this was huge for this young player. And I like the way that they've done it. Baby steps, have him start with Laval, have him get a few games, feel good about his game, build that confidence, and they have to call him up. Now's the opportunity. Brendan Gallagher being injured, the door is wide open to see what he's able to do at the NHL level. But I also think it's important to remember that he's a young player who has to develop, and he might not play like this every single night. I always think back about when Ryan Poehling made his NHL debut at the end of the season, and he had that game where he scored a hat trick and the shootout goal as well. That the expectations have to be leveled off at a certain point. And if his game does not consistently continue on this, where he's scoring all kinds of goals, doesn't mean anything's bad about him. It's just part of the development.
Yeah. You mentioned the development there, Jess, but Tony Granato in Wisconsin, former NHL player, played a 200-foot game. The last 2 years they've worked with Cole Caufield, learning how to play in all three zones. And that's worked. And kudos to him. Joel Bouchard, when he was talking this week or last week, I should say, also he said, kudos. He took his hat off to the Wisconsin coaching staff and what they've done, because Joel Bouchard saw Cole Caufield at the first development camp after he was drafted, and he noticed the difference just about how he's quicker, a little bit stronger, how he's better in all three zones. So, as you mentioned, Jeff, the Canadiens haven't rushed him. They sent him back 2 full years of university hockey under a really good coach, and he's a better player now than he was when the Canadiens drafted him.
And he strikes me as a personality that really doesn't get fazed by too much. He doesn't look like he's intimidated. He loves the challenge. He wants to be on the ice. He wants to make the difference, and he obviously has shown that and gets the results. But I like some of his comments. He's kind of a laid back kid, and just like goes, bring it on, and I'll jump in there and do what I do best. And I'm a team guy, but I want to win, and I know what it takes to win. So a real bonus to have a kid like that. And
smaller players like him, Paul Byron, Brendan Gallagher, there's something special about them because nothing has ever come easy to them. They've been small, since they were little kids. They were told, you're too small to play in the NHL, or you're too small to play midget AAA, you're too small to play junior, you're too small to play in the AHL. They've been told that their whole life. And I think it creates a burning desire in them that other players might not have when things have come easier to them. They've had to prove themselves since they were 6, 7, 8 years old at every single level of hockey. It's never come easy to them. And I think that brings that desire that you see when you see a Brendan Gallagher play, when you see a Paul Byron play, when you see a Johnny Gaudreau play, when you see some of those smaller players, Alex DeBrincat, they have something to prove every single time they step on the ice, and it's been that way since they were 7, 8, 9 years old. And I think they have a burning desire that some other players might not have, where they have more of the natural gifts to be a hockey player.
Well,
and I think also
a counterpoint here about Cole Caufield for a second is bringing him up to the big club, obviously, even if there's an 11-day layoff for the Laval Rocket. Is that not still, in a sense, rushing him? I think he's done really well in the American Hockey League, and I still think he has some room to grow and more time for him. I think more time for him is still needed for him to continue to learn how to find these open spots at the AHL level. And I know he's done as well as he's done so far, but is putting him with the Montreal Canadiens so soon just a form of rushing him? Why not just let him just sit back and just hang out with the Laval Rocket? I understand he might not be doing as much with no games going on in that stretch, but I don't know if putting him on a third, where's he going to go if he plays on the Montreal Canadiens? You're not going to put him on the first line right away. Or do you want him to go through that pressure right away? I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right thing. And I don't know if putting him on a checking line is necessarily going to be the best thing for him either. I'm not exactly sure if putting him up with the big club right away, even if the alternative is for him to sit for 11 days in practice, is as much of a good idea as some people feel. I can see why it's enticing, but I'm not sure. I'm not convinced.
Well, when you see a kid with that much talent, like that is excelled at all levels, I think for me, and anyways, a no-brainer to give him the opportunity to see what he can do, at the NHL level. I mean, there's nothing carved in stone that says that he has to play with this guy or that guy, or he has to play this many minutes. You bring him in the NHL environment. You've got a good dressing with a lot of good leadership. there's a young kid that can get a real feel and taste what it's like to be in the NHL, watch the NHL game, and then when he gets the opportunity, there's a kid that's going to jump all over it and it's going to make something happen. So I would really love to see this kid step in there, and I'm quite sure he'll have a real positive, effect on the whole group.
Well, that NHL experience you mentioned, Rick, that's so important. This is a university kid, so he's never played a preseason game in the NHL because of his university eligibility. So he's never had an opportunity to play with the Canadiens, to be in the room with the guys, to play an NHL level game, to put the Canadian sweater on for the first time. He hasn't had all of that. So, during that break, you could almost look at them as a couple of preseason games for him. Just give him a taste of what it's like, the whole game day routine, the morning skate in Brossard, going back for your nap, coming back to the Bell Center, just that whole experience of what it's like to actually play a game with the Montreal Canadiens. And where do you put him? I think you put him in Gallagher's spot. You're going to put him, he's a scorer. You got to put him with guys who can set him up to score. You're not going to put him on a fourth line checking line with Jake Evans. That would make absolutely no sense. So call him up. And as I mentioned before, I don't think there's anything to lose. You give him a little taste. He gets to figure out what it's like. I mentioned earlier, this kid has had a desire since he was a little kid. And if you send him back to Laval, it's only going to make him even hungrier to get back up to the NHL.
Yeah,
Let me just throw. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this scenario to me is the perfect one because it's not like, say, training camp happened. He had a great training camp. He starts the regular season with the team. And then by game 5, his game starts to drop off and he gets sent down to Laval. And when you get sent down, I think in a situation like that, your expectation is so high that you've made the team, but then it was just, you couldn't cut it. Whereas here, he's coming up with really no expectation. If he stays with the team throughout the regular season and the playoffs, great. But if he only plays 1 or 2 games and gets sent back down to Laval, that's great as well. It's just to kind of see where he measures up against other NHLers.
Let me throw out this question to you then. It's a slight change to the last one I was going to ask. Who would you rather see in the Brendan Gallagher spot? Cole Caufield or Paul Byron, who's done pretty well over the last few games?
So this one's hard because it all depends what Cole Caufield is able to bring and able to do, and if he can take that position. Now, Paul Byron has been playing very well as of late and has fit into that position so far pretty well. And he has that veteran experience that he could bring that maybe when you're playing quite a few games in a row, it might tire out a young player. But I think it's just right now a little bit difficult to say because we don't know with Cole Caufield, but it's also, let's see what the future has for this player and putting him in that position and seeing how he handles it.
Yeah, and they're looking for balanced scoring. To me, Caufield is what they're missing, a missing ingredient that, the guy knows how to score. And, maybe I'm too hyped up about him, but I'm always on the conservative side when I see these young kids coming in and, depending on personality, some adapt quicker than others, but he just strikes me as the kind of guy that just will thrive on challenges, and you give him a challenge, and I think his character will shine through as a real good player.
Yeah, that Gallagher spot to me just makes sense. Not only that he's a scorer, that's a goal scorer spot, playing with 2 veteran guys who play a 200-foot game that are really smart hockey players. He's going to learn from them. And just talk about Paul Byron. How do you not love Paul Byron? What this guy has gone through this year, been put on waivers 3 times. Assistant captain of the team, put on waivers 3 times. 4th line, healthy scratch, playing on the Gallagher spot. Everywhere he goes, he just fits in and he plays, gives everything he's got. He's a real character guy. I was talking about getting to know guys in the room. We can't do it this year, but getting to know Paul Byron a little bit in the locker room over the last few years, he's a Class A individual. He's just a really, really good guy, good leader. And what he's gone through this year, I don't know how many other guys could have handled it the way Paul Byron has handled it, both on and off the ice. We talked about Victor Mete being put on waivers, and he was asked if he had spoken to him yet, and he said he hadn't yet. He was waiting to see what happened. But Byron's wife had called Mete's girlfriend to see how she was doing with handling everything. So he's just a really, really class guy, a good leader, and what he's done this season, I don't think a lot of guys would have been able to handle it.
But if you're picking, you're putting Cole Caufield in the spot, and not Paul Byron, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Stu's the only one who has a definitive answer. Jess is unsure. Rick, I will say, the fact that you mentioned that you might be a bit more conservative. It's not just the fact that you're conservative with young kids. It's the fact that you went out of your way to praise a forward, knowing where your loyalties lie. That is something that struck me in our discussion of Cole Caufield. And look, this kid has looked really good in the American Hockey League. Get him as much seasoning as you can. All about leveling expectations for this type of player. I don't think you want to put him in a position where he's not going to succeed. Not to say the Canadiens necessarily would, but you just have to be careful considering the attributes that this player has. We've discussed a lot on this week's episode, a lot of fire. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Hockey Inside Out. Great job, everybody. You guys just keep bringing it week in and week out. If you have a question you'd like to see each of us tackle on this show, please write it in the comment section below and visit hockeyinsideout.com to check out our full episodes.